Bienvenidas y bienvenidos a la segunda entrega de nuestras conversaciones antifascistas de La Marea. Esta vez conectamos con Polonia, conectamos con Rafal Pankowski, que es miembro de la asociación Never Again, una asociación pionera en la lucha contra el racismo y contra el odio, y que hoy nos acompaña para esta segunda entrega de nuestras conversaciones antifascistas de La Marea. Junto con Patricia Simón tendremos una conversación con Rafal a lo largo de unos 40 minutos y nos explicará un poco qué está pasando en Polonia y a qué se dedica también los movimientos sociales Never Again, que es la organización a la que pertenece, en la lucha contra el racismo, la extrema derecha, que lamentablemente pues gobierna desde hace tiempo en este país. Buenas tardes, Rafal, Patricia.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes, Rafal. Nos gustaría que nos explicaras a qué se dedica Never Again, la asociación a la que perteneces, y qué trabajo desarrolla, lleva desarrollando desde hace muchos años, y sobre todo ahora que en Polonia pues gobierna la extrema derecha.
Well, thank you for having me. The Never Again Association was created in 1996. So we are not a new organization. We have been around for more than a quarter of a century now. We started as a group of young people who were concerned about the issue of violence coming from the extreme right, coming from the Nazi skinhead scene that was growing in Poland in the 1990s. And the problem was that we saw what you may call a certain indifference on the part of the public opinion, media, and politicians. And what we wanted to do is to break the silence around the problem of far-right violence, the problem of new extreme right and neo-fascist groups that appeared in Poland at the time, but hardly noticed on different levels, and we wanted to change it. So we created a magazine under the title Never Again, Nigdy Więcej in Polish. And we started collecting and publishing information on specific cases of fascist and racist violence in Poland. And we also initiated educational campaigns. I should especially mention the role of Marcin Kornaj, who was one of the main figures, the leader of Never Again for many years, who was a disabled person, but he was a very active figure and a very inspiring person, who initiated the campaigns such as Music Against Racism, as well as Let's Kick Racism Out of the Stadiums. So these two campaigns, utilizing the channels of popular culture to promote an anti-fascist message. And when Marcin Kornaj passed away in 2014, but we still continued this activity, and we also continued the campaigns, Music Against Racism and Let's Kick Racism Out of the Stadiums. And now fast forward to nowadays, and your second question about the current significance of the far right in Poland, including the highest level of politics. Well, of course, there is a big difference between now and the 1990s, in the sense that in the 90s, we mostly dealt with street-level far-right violence and activity. Today, the far-right in Poland has a lot of influence in institutions such as parliament, as well as ministries. But oftentimes we are talking about people and groups with a very similar ideology, the ideology of hatred against minorities. And I would say today the Ministry of Education is probably the most problematic when it comes to the discussion of far-right influence, far-right ideological influence in Polish institutions. One of the examples of that is the list of civil society groups that are apparently forbidden to enter schools or to run any activities in schools in the Małopolska region, which means the region around Kraków and including Kraków, which is the old capital of Poland and one of the main cities and one of the main regions of Poland that symbolically includes Oświęcim, which is internationally known as Auschwitz, of course. And the Never Again Association is one of many civil society organizations on that list, created by the regional educational authority. And like I said, this is just one of many examples of the climate that the far right influences and creates, and the climate of hostility against different types of independent civil society groups, as well as different types of minorities, starting from ethnic minorities, but also including LGBT groups, as well as feminist groups that are also well represented on the list of unwanted organizations.
Siendo Polonia un país que sufrió la ocupación nazi y que alberga uno de los episodios más ignominiosos de lo que fue el Holocausto, representado en el campo de exterminio de Auschwitz, ¿cómo se trata desde la sociedad polaca que exista gente que se reconozca como nazi en Polonia? ¿Cómo se come esto?
This is a good question, but it's also quite complex, I admit, and it is difficult to understand for many people outside of Poland, but also inside of Poland. How is it even possible for a phenomenon such as neo-Nazism to exist in a country that suffered so much under the Nazi occupation during World War II? Let me mention several things here. Well, first of all, the number of people who would openly call themselves neo-Nazi in Poland is relatively small for those obvious reasons. At the same time, they also exist, and that has been documented by Never Again, by journalists. Those groups also exist in Poland, and this is a bit of a puzzle. Yes, how can you call yourself a Polish nationalist or a patriot and eulogize Hitler at the same time? But yes, those groups exist too, and we also have for many years we have dealt with the neo-Nazi music scene. The most famous or infamous band has been a band under the name Conquista 88, and of course we know what 88 stands for here, and this band has been popular. We also had the chapters of international Nazi groups such as Blood and Honor or Combat 18 that also organized some activities in Poland, activities that are openly neo-Nazi. But I think what is maybe more important and more problematic is those groups that we would call fascist, that are not openly pro-Nazi in the sense that they don't use the symbolism of German National Socialism from the era before 1945, but everything else is very similar. So if we interpret fascism and fascist ideology as as an idea of total cultural homogeneity, then of course fascism in Poland exists today, and it also has a history that goes back to the 1920s and the 1930s. In the 1930s, the main group was called the National Radical Camp, and it was obviously inspired by Italy, by Germany, I suppose by Spain in some ways, and that was a group that was popular among a section of Polish youth in the 30s, especially university students. It was actually banned in Poland for promoting racial hatred and for using violence. Now, today, a group with the same name, National Radical Camp, exists in Poland again, and it has been one of the main organizers of the Independence Day marches in Warsaw on the 11th of November. So we see a certain continuity between the fascist groups in Poland, those groups that existed in the 1930s, and the groups that exist today. Now there is another complex issue of collaboration during World War II, collaboration with the Nazis. Poland was one of the few countries in Europe that did not have organized political collaboration, partly or largely because the German Nazis didn't want it. But there were cases of collaboration as well as cases of anti-Semitic violence and pogroms committed by the local Polish population, which is until today a very controversial issue. So the whole thing of dealing with the past, including the past or especially the past of anti-Jewish violence committed by Poles during World War II, that is still very controversial. Having said that, of course, Poland has a great tradition of resistance against the Nazis during World War II, and more generally a history of fighting fascism, also going back to the Polish participation in the international brigades and the Spanish Civil War that I think in a way we can be proud of, and also never again sees itself, we see ourselves as part of that anti-fascist tradition.
Rafal, es muy interesante lo que has planteado porque nos enlaza con una cuestión que además está muy de actualidad en nuestro país, y es la memoria histórica. El hecho de que la ultraderecha esté en el gobierno polaco, ¿cómo ha influido y ha cambiado la relación que tiene la sociedad con su memoria histórica y cómo se estudia ese pasado y su relación con el pasado nazi, ¿no?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is actually a very important issue. Still, I would say that in the beginning of the 2000s, Poland made a lot of progress on dealing with the past. There was a very important book published by a Polish-American historian and a good friend of the Never Again Association, Jan Tomasz Gross, the book under the title Neighbors, about the pogrom of the Jewish population of one town in 1941, a pogrom conducted by the Polish neighbors of the Jewish victims. And that book provoked a huge public debate about the legacy of anti-Semitism in Poland, and especially the history of anti-Semitic violence in Poland during World War II. And at that time, I think, yes, a lot of progress was made on many different levels, including the level of an apology by the then president of Poland, who was the social democratic president Kwaśniewski, who attended a ceremony on the anniversary of the massacre in Jedwabne, and that was very memorable and very historic. That was speech he gave at that place. But I think progress cannot be taken for granted. It can never be taken for granted. And what I think we have witnessed in Poland in the last years is a reversal of the progress that was made on dealing with the past, the difficult aspects of Polish history. And today, the official line that dominates the official narrative that dominates the main institutions is one of denial of any Polish responsibility or involvement in those crimes. And I think that the most spectacular instance of the official denial was the legislation that was enacted in 2018 that specifically prohibited any public any public discourse on Polish complicity in the Holocaust and crimes of the Nazi occupation in Poland. That was in 2018, and that created a huge controversy both in Poland and internationally. After a few months, in June that year, that legislation was amended. So, well, technically speaking, if we talk about it now, we would not go to jail for this alleged crime, but we could still be punished by a huge financial fine. Nobody has ever been convicted under this legislation, which shows that the real purpose isn't perhaps really to go after every single case, but of course it has an impact on the public discourse. It is meant to discourage people from raising those difficult issues in public, and especially in the educational system, the formal educational system. And I already mentioned that the educational system is one of the main front lines where the far right pushes its ideological agenda, and this is felt especially on issues such as history of the Holocaust or history of anti-Semitism in Poland. So it is still possible to talk about it in academic settings, but it is increasingly difficult. And the Ministry of Education is trying to make it difficult in many different ways, and step by step it is also changing the curriculum in schools, for example, including the curriculum on civic education. Well, there was a notorious new handbook that was published and promoted by the Polish Minister of Education just last year. And the controversy went beyond issues of anti-Semitism, but it also included other things, including rock music, which, according to the author, is dangerous, and young people should be discouraged from listening to it. And there was even a little list of bands that are dangerous, starting with the Beatles. So you can basically imagine what kind of reactionary far right agenda we are talking about. History is definitely one of the most important subjects that is under pressure, but there are also other topics and other themes that are part of this reactionary far right agenda that is very significant, especially in the field of state-run educational systems.
Rafal ha hablado sobre ese ambiente de impunidad que se está asentando en Polonia para todo este tipo de crímenes de odio y de la ultraderecha, y ese ambiente cada vez más asfixiante y que no deja espacio para el sistema educativo en una cultura democrática. ¿Qué encuentran como defensores y defensoras de derechos humanos en Bruselas, en la Unión Europea? ¿Han encontrado un espacio en el que poder defender los derechos fundamentales? ¿Y qué papel está jugando la Unión Europea en esta deriva antidemocrática de Polonia?
Well, I would say one of the paradoxes of the Polish situation today is the fact that, by and large, Polish society is among the most pro-European societies in the European Union now. So I think the support for Polish membership in the EU is still around 80%. It is overwhelming. And at the same time, the ruling party is kind of Eurosceptic, Law and Justice. And inside of the government, there is also a smaller right-wing party, which is called Solidarna Polska, which we can translate as Solidary Poland or United Poland, which is openly anti-EU. And that small party controls the Ministry of Justice, which is related to a lot of the ongoing controversy around the rule of law in Poland, as well as the relations with the EU, with a focus on the rule of law issue and the control of the judicial system. And I would say openly, I think by now, most people in Poland, and certainly outside of Poland, lost track about the details of the dispute, because there were so many pieces of legislation and so many amendments that I think, apart from a handful of specialists, people don't even remember exactly what this is about in terms of details. But what is clear is, of course, that the ruling party would like to have more influence on the judicial system, and the European Union is trying to uphold the principles of the rule of law and judicial independence. That is clear. But having said that, I think this story is going to continue for a long time, and I think everybody knows that this is not going to be solved anytime soon. And I would say that from the point of view of the average citizen, the rule of law issue is probably not the number one issue, because there are so many other problems, and especially recently, that people are concerned about on a daily basis. But when we talk about the more general issue of a crisis of democratic culture and democratic values in Poland, I think that the EU hasn't really had much of a say, apart from the issue of the courts, as important as it is, but it is not the only issue. So when we talk about the problems with the education ministry, I'm not aware of any reaction from the European Union. Or when we talk about the other issues such as the treatment of minorities, I don't think we heard much from the European Union on this issue. Okay, the European Parliament passed some resolutions protesting against discrimination of LGBT people in Poland, for example. But as we know, the European Parliament resolutions are more symbolic than anything else. They are important, but they have no direct impact on the actual situation on the ground.
Polonia ha sido uno de los países que ha realizado una acogida mayor de personas refugiadas de Ucrania huyendo de la guerra y, sin embargo, también a lo largo de estos últimos años en Polonia se han agolpado a sus fronteras numerosas personas que trataban de cruzar el país para llegar a otros puntos de Europa y que recibían un trato que ha sido documentado numerosas veces por organizaciones de derechos humanos, pues bastante degradante. Existe muchas diferencias, ha habido mucha controversia con la diferencia de trato entre las personas refugiadas de Ucrania y las personas refugiadas de otros países. ¿Ha cambiado la política de asilo? ¿Ha cambiado la política de migración a partir de la guerra? ¿Siguen habiendo esta diferencia?
Well, this is certainly a very important subject for Poland and Polish society today. Well, we know that in 2015, during the so-called refugee crisis in the south of Europe, the Polish government, the newly elected government of law and justice, refused to accept any refugees from the south, from the Middle East, and we know that that was also accompanied by a kind of anti-refugee and xenophobic rhetoric that was often very nasty, and it continued, and in a way it has continued ever since. But at the same time, the war in Ukraine had a huge impact on Poland, also or especially in the case of refugees from Ukraine who entered Poland in the first days and weeks of the war, and still now. Nobody knows the precise figure, but the estimates are between 1 and 2 million Ukrainian refugees in Poland today, and we are talking about a country of around 38 million inhabitants. So it is a huge number by any count. And I can tell you honestly, for many years, Never Again, and me personally, I have been very critical of my own country, but my own society, authorities on many topics, including and especially including the treatment of refugees. But I would say, quite frankly, when it comes to the treatment of the refugees from Ukraine, I'm actually quite happy and quite proud of the way Polish society has accepted them, and I think that there are many positive stories and positive examples of how society at the grassroots welcomes the refugees with open arms. Now, at the same time, we also have far-right groups who have been trying to incite hostility and hate speech and also hate crimes against those refugees. And this is something that the Never Again Association started monitoring from the very first days of the war, and already in April 2022 we published the first report on that issue, and we are still monitoring this issue very closely. And well, I'm afraid that the examples of incitement of hostility against the refugees may grow more frequent with time, for different reasons. One of the reasons, or one of the main reasons, is the organized campaign or campaigns on the part of the extreme right that would like to promote hostility against the refugees, and they would like to promote the anti-Ukrainian propaganda more broadly. Having said that, there are also other refugee groups that are still discriminated against in Poland, and that includes especially refugees from the Middle East and more generally from majority Muslim countries. There is still a humanitarian crisis on the Polish-Belarusian border, where a number of people died already in the last months, and they were not given a chance to apply for asylum, which human rights lawyers and activists say is against the international law, because people should at least have the chance to file their application, and they were not given this chance. And still now, as we speak, there are people who are stuck on the Polish-Belarusian border in very difficult conditions, and there's very little access to the border because it has been militarized by an act of parliament. So this is still very difficult. There is yet another issue of refugees from Ukraine who were not Ukrainian nationals, and that was especially important in the first weeks of the war and the refugee movement, and it got a lot of press internationally for good reasons. It is very clear that there were cases of discrimination, especially of non-white refugees from Ukraine on the border, which I think partly was related to the chaos on the border, partly to the way that the Ukrainian authorities prioritized the movement of Ukrainian women and children out of the country. So, for example, students at Ukrainian universities from countries in Africa and Asia often were kept waiting to cross the border. But eventually, I think by now, or a long time ago now, more or less everybody who wanted to leave Ukraine could leave Ukraine, including those students. And I think in the majority of cases, they used the opportunity to return to their countries, be it India or Nigeria or other countries. I think in a minority of those cases, they are still in Poland. And at least they are on the safe side of the border, which I think is what counts. But unfortunately, they don't have automatically the same kind of status that the Ukrainian passport holders have in Poland, which is similar to Polish citizens, apart from the right to vote, maybe. But most of the other rights, including the social rights, the right to healthcare and education, is automatically given to the Ukrainian refugees, which I think is basically a good thing, and we should definitely strive to obtain the same level of protection and support for all the other refugees. So when sometimes this inequality in treatment of different types of refugees is mentioned, I accept there is a reason for that. There is a reason for pointing it out, but the solution to that should not be the decreasing of the level of support for the Ukrainian refugees. On the other, it should be the other way around. We should increase the level of protection and support for all the refugees, at least to the same level that the Ukrainian refugees have. But again, overall, I would say that the impact of the refugee movement from Ukraine to Poland is very important, very significant, and I think it is also very important in the long term, because even if there is peace in Ukraine tomorrow, which we all hope would be the case, but it's not certain. Even then, I think many of the Ukrainian refugees would stay in Poland for a lot of different reasons. And I think this is something that transforms Poland. Poland used to be a very multicultural society, a very multicultural country historically. Since World War II, it was very monolithic in terms of culture and ethnicity. And this is changing again because of the refugee situation, which for Poland could also have some benefits, of course, under tragic circumstances.
En Polonia no se puede entender también esta deriva ultraderechista que ha vivido en los últimos años sin atender al papel que ha jugado alguno de sus líderes, que son los propietarios de los principales medios de comunicación, como Radio María, desde los que se lanza un discurso de odio a muchos grupos, como las personas migrantes, refugiadas, las feministas o la población gitana. ¿Qué papel está jugando esta Iglesia Católica ultrarreaccionaria en la lucha, en la persecución de derechos básicos como el derecho al aborto, el derecho a la igualdad de todos los grupos sociales y la persecución de las personas migrantes?
Well, historically, the Catholic Church has played an important role in Poland, and this is one more thing that unites Poland and Spain, I guess. In the last years, the levels of church attendance have been dropping, and especially among the young people. So I would say that the Catholic Church is no longer the hegemonic, actor in the field of spirituality. But it has never been 100% true that every Pole is a Catholic. There is also an important legacy of the Reformation in Poland, and of course other religions, including Judaism, including Islam, that has a presence in Poland since the Middle Ages, and so on. But of course, the main denomination has been and still is Roman Catholic, and it is still, like you said, extremely influential on the political level, and especially on the right wing. And well, I already alluded to the Minister of Education, and the Minister of Education just recently said again, there is no Polishness without Christianity. And very openly, the Minister of Education is pushing a hardline version of Roman Catholicism as the official ideology of the educational system, which of course goes against any notion of neutrality or equality of the different faiths and views. I think back in the 90s, we could still argue which of the wings of the Catholic Church in Poland was more representative of the Catholic community at large. So on the one hand, we had the liberal Catholics, and on the other hand, we had the hardline nationalist wing within the Polish Catholic Church, represented by the radio station, as well as a social movement around it known as Radio Maria. And today, I think it is quite clear that the hardline faction has won the battle, if you like. So now it is Radio Maria, which used to be considered extremist, that is now dominating the Catholic spectrum in Poland. And I think that is sad and that is unfortunate, but it is true. And I would say one last example of that is the fact that the Israeli ambassador attended a public meeting, a ceremony together with the Radio Maria leaders at their HQ in the Polish city of Toruń. And we are talking about a radio station with a long history of radical anti-Semitic statements. So if the ambassador of Israel goes there and calls them friends in public, I think that says something about the approach of the Israeli government, but it also says a lot about who is calling the shots in the Catholic Church in Poland today.
Pues hasta aquí nuestra conversación con Rafal Pankowski de Never Again, desde Polonia. Y ha sido un placer tenerte con nosotros en esta segunda entrevista del especial antifascista de La Marea. Si quieres añadir alguna cosa más, nosotros vamos a estar en contacto porque no es la primera vez que La Marea habla con Never Again y habla con Rafal Pankowski. Así que agradecerte tu disposición, agradecer vuestro trabajo e invitarte a que continuéis con el trabajo que estáis haciendo y que aquí estamos para lo que haga falta. Gracias, Rafal.
Well, thank you so much for your kind invitation, for these very, very interesting and very broad-ranging questions. If I could maybe add something, it would be that I think a lot of the topics we talked about they can be discussed in the context of Poland, but of course this is not just one country we are talking about here. We could be talking about similar topics, I'm sure in the case of Spain, but also other countries in Europe and outside of Europe. And I think that shows that a lot of the problems, a lot of the challenges are similar, if not the same. And I think that just illustrates the importance of international solidarity, which I think is more important and necessary than ever. And if we, as Never Again, can contribute to the international anti-fascist solidarity, we are always more than happy to do that. So thank you again for your support and your interest, and I hope to cooperate in future as well.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Rafal.